ለመማር ወደ ትምህርት ተቋም መሄድ ግድ አይደለም።
ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
ራሳችሁን ከኮሮና ቫይረስ ወረርሽኝ እየጠበቃችሁ በቤታችሁ ወይም በተመቻችሁ ቦታ
በኢንተርኔት አማካኝነት በኦንላይን ትምህርታችሁን መከታተል ይቻላል።
ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና
ከእንግሊዙ ኢንስቲትዩት ኦፍ ኮመርሻል ማኔጅመንት ICM ጋር በመተባበር የሚሰጡ ትምህርቶችን ተከታትላችሁ በ6 ወር ጊዜ በዓለም አቀፍ ደረጃ ተቀባይነት ያለውን የስልጠና ማስረጃ ባለቤት መሆን ይቻላል።
ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና ባገኘንባቸው የፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን እና የሆስተስ ስልጠናም በምዝገባ ላይ ነን።
ጥያቄና መልስ፣ የክፍል ስራዎች ብሎም ፈተና መፈተን ክፍል ውስጥ እንዳላችሁ አይነት
ልምድ ባላቸው መምህራን እየተማራችሁ
በኦንላይን ባላችሁበት ቦታ
አድራሻ ከ22 ማዞሪያ ወደ ሾላ ገበያ በሚወስደው መንገድ 150 ሜትር ገባ ብሎ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ
ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, teacher.
Good afternoon, doctor.
Okay, I think it's better to start. In our yesterday's class, we have seen about the nature of capital structure and capital structure theories. Specifically, we have seen some of the non-capital structure theories. Under MM, Morigliani and Miller, there are 3 propositions: zero tax, with corporate tax, and with corporate and personal tax. And we have seen these 2. Capital structure in the first place means the mix between debt and equity financing. Or in other words, percentage of finance from liability, long-term liability, and percentage of finance from equity by selling common stock or preferred stock. Now, what percentage of liability is appropriate for our company and what percentage of equity is appropriate for our company, having wealth maximization goal in mind. Now, under the first proposition of MM, what is appropriate source of finance? Is that debt or equity? And what was the appropriate source of finance or the appropriate capital structure under the first proposition 1 and under the second proposition? In the first proposition, capital structure is irrelevant. So whatever the source of finance is, there is no effect on the total cash flow of the organization and the wealth of shareholders. So capital structure is irrelevant. So as a manager, if you are convinced with this theory and if you believe that your context allows to work in line with this theory, we should not care about the source of finance, so because it is irrelevant. Under the second proposition, corporate tax, debt has tax advantage. That means interest. If there is debt financing, there will be interest payment. That interest will be deducted from our company's taxable income. So there is interest tax shield. So because interest is deductible from taxable income, we can save from tax. So debt financing will have more value maximization effect. So the appropriate source of finance is debt. The first one is irrelevant. And the second one is debt financing. Debt financing is appropriate. Under the third proposition by MM, if corporate tax and personal tax is included together. And as I've seen in our yesterday's class, if our company is a corporation, there is corporate tax. As a corporation, there will be tax payment. And at the time of paying dividend, there is tax on dividend. So there is double taxation in organizations. So if there is personal tax, corporate tax will favor debt financing. Personal tax will minimize the positive effect of debt financing. So let's see the third proposition of MM. the third proposition. Since this, the third proposition with corporate tax and personal tax. Under personal tax, lessen the advantage of the corporate debt. So, because there is personal tax, the debt advantage will be minimized because corporate tax favor debt financing, as I've seen in our yesterday's class, since corporations can deduct interest expense. But the personal tax favors equity financing because that personal tax is not deductible from tax. We pay dividend after payment to tax. So personal tax favors equity financing. When you say equity financing, we are referring selling shares. So since no gain is reported until stock is sold, and long-term gains are taxed at lower rate. So personal tax will be there if there is dividend and if there is sales. That means if the shareholder is interested to sell the share, and if there is gain from that sales, there will be tax. Otherwise, if the shareholder is interested to hold that share, there is no tax gain. I mean, gain tax or capital gain tax. So it is possible to avoid capital gain tax. That is the personal tax. Simply, the main thing that I have to know here is corporate tax favors debt financing, personal tax favors equity financing. And this is a formula to calculate the value addition by this source of finance in the presence of debt source of finance in the presence of personal tax and corporate tax. In corporate tax, the interest tax shield was simply tax rate times total debt, as I've seen in our yesterday's class. Interest tax shield. But personal tax lessens this advantage. Tax shield advantage will be lessened by the personal tax. So personal tax, there will be personal tax on debt financing or personal tax on debt income. This, for example, if you own bond of a corporation, interest is tax for expense for the corporation and it is income for the buyer. For the owner, it is income, and there is income tax on that. And if you are owning shares, you will receive dividend and you will sell shares. If there is capital gain on that shares, you have to pay tax. So personal tax is here in both debt and equity financing sources. So corporate tax increases the value of shareholders, but this corporate tax, debt financing's advantage in the presence of corporate tax will be lessened by this personal tax. The advantage will be minimized, but still debt financing is appropriate. But compared with only assuming corporate tax, if there is personal tax, the advantage of debt financing will minimize. That means, for example, if the tax is 40%, personal tax on debt 30%, personal tax on equity. If you purchase share, the tax rate, personal tax rate, for example, tax on dividend will be there. If you purchase bond, corporate bond, if it is allowed, it will have its own personal tax. And there is corporate tax rate. And this is a formula to calculate the value addition by using debt financing. So when you complete this formula, value of unlevered firm. In the case of corporate tax, if you remember, value of levered firm equals with value of unlevered firm, or VU, plus interest tax shield, simply tax rate times total debt. This formula, this was if corporate tax only is there in the company. We have seen this in our previous class, or the second proposition. But it's not, the debt financing's tax advantage is not 100%. So in this case, when you complete this formula, forget about the proof, simply understand the concept. Because there is personal tax, the advantage of debt financing will be minimized. But in our previous class, if you remember, if the corporate tax rate is 40%, a BIR financing from date will add 40 cents to the firm value. But if there is personal tax, it will be minimized from 40% to 25%. That means if we express in terms of cents, one source of finance from date will add 25 cents to the firm value if there is personal tax. Personal tax minimizes the advantage of debt financing. But had it been only corporate tax, it was one bill finance from date will add the tax rates amount to the firm value. So personal tax minimizes debt financing's advantage to the firm. Are you with me? Hello? Is that clear?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
If you have any question. So still in the third, okay?
Yeah. Sorry, sir.
Okay, you can come.
Yeah, my question is, here we have a combination of both the corporate tax, the debt, and the stock.
Yes.
But under the formula, it says value raises with debt. Each one increase in debt raises its value by this much. የዴት ኢንክሪዝ መሆን ብቻ ነው ወይ? ምክንያቱም እዚህ ጋር ካልኩሌት እያደረገን ያለው የሶስቱን ኮምቢኔሽን ስለሆነ በርግጥ ዲኖሚኔተሩ ዴት ነው። የዴቱ ኢንክሪዝ መሆን ሬቱ እንትን ዲኖሚኔተሩ ስለሚያሳንሰው እንትኑ ቫሉ ሬቱ ከፈሱ ገብቶኛል። ግን ደግሞ ዋን ማይነስ ነች እዚህ ጋር ዋን ማይነስ ስለሆነች የኮምቢኔሽን ስለሆነ ለምንድን ነው ከዴቱ ጋር ብቻ አያይዘን ካልኩሌት የምናደርገው የሚለው አልገባኝም።
Okay. I think there is a derivative in the paper. It is better to read the original paper. I'll forward if you are interested.
Okay.
Complex procedure on the derivative paper. Can you hear me?
አሁን ይሰማል።
እንትኑ ሼር ላርግ ወደ ዴሪቬቲቭ ከምን ጋር because በጣም ኮምፕሊኬትድ ዴሪቬቲቭስ አሉ። እዚህ ጋር ቤዚኩን እያወራን ስለሆነ ነው። very interested about that, better to read the original paper. ኢሜልን ተነመለልኝና ልክልሃለሁ ፔፐሩ።
እሺ
we'll talk personally. ስንጨርስ እንዳትረሳው። simply አይዲያው ግን ፐርሰናል ታክስ ሲኖር የኮርፖሬት ታክስ አድቫንቴጅን ይቀንስብናል እንጂ still debt financing advantages ነው። This is the essence. So conclusions with personal tax, use of debt financing remains advantageous, but benefits are lessened under only corporate tax. So the benefit would be minimized. So firms should still use 100% debt. Now, under MM theories, the first one is irrelevant. The second proposition, corporate tax. The appropriate source of finance is 100% debt. With corporate and personal tax, still 100% debt. Still 100% debt. So, note, however, Miller argued that in equilibrium, that this advantage will be adjusted. But it is better to read the original paper. And if you have no need to bother about this because it is advanced concept. It is advanced. This is original paper, the original theory by MM, Rigliani and Miller. It was a Nobel Prize winner paper. They won Nobel Prize in this paper. So if you are interested, read this one. Rigliani and Miller, 1958. This is the first paper. And 1963, there is a second paper. Actually, the third paper is by Miller. And read those papers. And some other studies also found contradictory result. You can also see Chadri 2010. And different theories say different things. So the literature is contradictory. Still, some says debt financing will add value to the firm, some says the reverse. Still, the literature is not settled. So this is MM's theory. 3 propositions. No tax, capital structure is irrelevant. With corporate tax, debt financing is appropriate. With personal and corporate tax, still debt financing is appropriate, but the value will be minimized. So another theory is trade-off theory. Trade-off theory. MM ignores bankruptcy. One of the assumptions of MM is there is no bankruptcy, or there is no financial distress cost. Bankruptcy means if there is too much debt financing, if the firm fails to pay principal plus interest, the company will bankrupt, practically. But MM assumes that there is no bankruptcy cost. And at low leverage level, tax benefits outweigh bankruptcy cost. There is music somewhere. Okay, now it's okay. Okay, but at high level, bankruptcy cost outweighs tax benefit. The level of debt financing. If our company's debt financing is low, there will be tax advantage and the bankruptcy cost can be minimized. But if there is too much debt financing, the advantage of debt financing will be lower than the disadvantage, or the bankruptcy cost will outweigh the advantage of debt financing. So at optimal, an optimal capital structure exists that balance these costs and benefits. Cost and the benefit. The benefit is tax advantage. The cost is bankruptcy. But MM ignores or assumes that there is no bankruptcy cost, but trade-off theory argues that there is bankruptcy cost. And if there is too much debt financing, there will be bankruptcy. The cost of bankruptcy will exceed the benefit of debt financing. So we have to balance the trade-off. You can read this paper. So when you see it graphically, under trade-off theory, in the x-axis, there's debt financing. In the y-axis, the value of the firm value, which is the decision criteria. The capital structure must minimize cost of capital and maximize firm value. At low level of debt, starting from 0, low level of debt, the firm value will increase because there is tax advantage, as I have seen under MM. The debt advantage is there. But if we increase the debt financing, there will be financial distress. The firm value will decline. Because the cost of financial distress will outweigh the benefit of debt financing. So under trade-off theory, the appropriate capital structure is a capital structure that strikes balance between the advantage of debt financing and the disadvantage, or in other words, tax advantage and cost of financial distress must be balanced. So it is against MM's theory. MM says 100% debt, but trade-off theory says that we have to balance because too much debt financing leads to financial distress. So the financial distress cost will outweigh the advantage of debt financing if there is too much debt financing. So the conclusion is strike the balance between the costs and the benefits. Is that clear? Are you with me?
Yes,
we are.
No, know the assumptions and no conclusions. Okay. Okay, another theory is signaling theory. MM argues that investors and managers have the same information. You can see the assumptions of MM. Managers of the organization and investors. MM assumes that both have the same information, but managers often have better information. Practically, the corporation will be managed by a group of managers, starting from shareholders. Starting from board of directors, sorry. Managers will decide on organizational issues. Shareholders are far from the company. For example, if there is a private bank, you can assume we may have share in that bank, but the bank will be managed by the day-to-day activities, and other strategic issues will be managed by a group of managers. So practically, managers will have better information than investors. But MM assumes that both managers and investors will have the same information. But managers have better information that they will sell stock if the stock price is overvalued. If there is financial market, assume we can sell shares if our company's share price is overvalued. That means the actual value of that share compared with the market value of the share. Managers know the actual value of the share. The actual value of the share will be influenced by the activities of the organization. For example, if there is a new project designed, and if that project is going to be profitable, when that project is released, the share price will increase. But if there is project and that project is profitable, but it's not, the information is not still disseminated to different parties, only the management knows this. In this case, the company's share price is lower than the actual share price because the prospect is good, so the share price must increase. If the prospect is not good, the share price must decrease. Sometimes the prospect of the company may not be good. So if that information is not yet released, the share price in the market will be overvalued. And sometimes the share price will be undervalued because of different reasons. If the share price is overvalued, managers will decide to issue shares. They will sell shares. And if the share price is undervalued, they will share bond. Undervalued means if there is a new project that's going to be profitable, if the management team releases that information, the share price will increase. But if that information is still on the hand of the management, that means the share price is undervalued, so it's not appropriate to sell shares. Instead, sell bonds. So simply, management's decision to issue share or to issue bond is signaling some information to outsiders. So investors understand this. So view new stock sales as negative signal. That means if the company is selling shares, additional shares, it is negative signal. If the company is selling shares, that means the company's current share price is overvalued. In the future, share price will decline. That's why the management is selling shares at a price higher than the actual price. And if the company is issuing bond, positive signal. The current market price of the share is undervalued. That means in the future, the price will increase. For example, if the argument and signaling theory is consistent with your thinking, and for example, if a new company, huge company is issuing shares as additional source of finance, are you going to buy shares? What will be your decision? Will you buy shares?
No.
Why?
Because it's going to be, the value of the share will be minimized after some time.
After some time. That means the current price is overvalued. In the future, the price will decline. If the company is issuing bond,
I will buy it.
I will buy because
The company is going to be profitable.
Profitable in the future. The current market price of the share is undervalued. So you can purchase shares today in the future, the share price will increase, so you can sell it. So this theory is in line with the information asymmetry theory. Managers will have better information. So the manager's decision will signal something to shareholders. So you can read Ross, because there is a book also. So signaling theory by Ross. So under signaling theory, capital structure is irrelevant and it transmits information to shareholders. If the company issues shares, negative. If the company issues bond, positive information. This is the conclusion. Another theory is pecking order theory. Pecking order. And firms use internally generated funds. Pecking order theory says that there is some order, natural order of financing. The company will not directly go to issuing debt or equity source of finance. There is natural pecking order. The first one is internally generated funds. That means retained earning. Because there is no floating cost, there is no negative signal. If the company is using its own income, there is no floating cost, as I have seen in our previous class, and there is no negative signal. So the first source of finance is internally generated fund, that is retained earning. It is logical and consistent with the practical world. For example, if the company is having enough net income and retaining some portion from that net income, no need to issue bond or no need to issue additional shares. It's logical. If that internally generated fund is not enough, if more funds are needed, firms then issue debt, the second one. The reason for this is low floating cost compared with shares. And there is no negative signal. Debt financing. That means if the company issues bond, the signal is positive. So the firm value will increase. Still, if this bond is not enough, or if more funds are needed, firms then issue equity. The final twice. Firms issue equity. Because equity will have negative signal, and the floating cost is high compared with debt financing. So there is this pecking order according to Myers. Actually, Donaldson also modified this, but the original pecking order theory is like this. Which theory do you think is consistent with the practice? For example, if you are in a position to decide the source of finance in our country, which theory can be applied, or which theory can be followed to maximize? Actually, there is no financial market and it's difficult to know the share price. For example, ignore that. And which theory do you think is appropriate and practical to implement?
In our country, it's difficult, sir.
Which one?
Yeah, in our country, the debt is so costly. ከተወሰነ ወራት በፊት ባንኮች እንኳን እንደዚህ ሊኩዊዲቲ ፕሮብሌም ገጥሟቸው ከብሔራዊ ባንክ እስከ 15% እና ከዛ በላይ አክቹአሊ ተበድሮና ዴት በጣም ኮስቲ ነው በእኛ ሀገር ሪላቲቭሊ ከኢኩዊቲ ከመሸጥ ማለት ኢኩዊቲ መሸጥ በራሱ በእርግጥ ረጅም ጊዜ ይፈልጋል በአጭር ጊዜ ገንዘቡ አይገኝም ቢሆንም ግን ዴት ደግሞ በጣም ኮስቲ ነው በጣም ብር በቀላሉ አይገኝም ሊገኝም ግን ኮስቲ ነው
Actually, there is another line of argument. Is really debt financing costly in our country compared with the inflation level? It is another question.
Okay.
Because if there is inflation, the real cost of debt will decline. And there is another argument, think, in this line too. Inflation በጣም እየጨመረ ነው ስለዚህ really the debt financing cost የረጅም ጊዜ ብድር ብንወስድ ውድ ነው ወይ የሚለውን በሌላ መልኩ አርጊው ማድረግ ይቻላል ግን if you are a manager actually for example at the time of leading a country for example parties follow some theory there are political economic theories in companies at the time to implement our financial or capital structure decision will be in line with some theory. It's not arbitrary. So if you are in a position, which theory is convincing to follow for you? It depends on your argument, actually.
Yeah, yeah, it depends. And of course, it depends from company to company.
Company to company,
yeah,
risk-taking behavior of managers,
yes,
sales stability, and other issues are there. እንደው ስናየው ግን የትኛው ነው እውነት የሚመስል ብንተገብረው ልንከተለው የምንችለው? For example, MM ካለን capital structure አይጠቅም ያገኘነው እንጠቀም ነው. The first proposition.
Yeah.
Is it logical for you? The second proposition is the second and the third proposition of MM says that 100% debt financing. Is it appropriate to believe this?
No,
and
no,
do you think
not
this is easy to implement in our country?
Yeah, we should first exhaust our internal source of financing.
Yeah.
So we should, theoretically, yes. The other problem in our country is where to get the finance is the problem. Where to get the finance? Companies are not really free to bid their finance.
Sure.
I will go with the first one.
Which one? MM1?
Yeah.
Irrelevant, that means.
No, not that. I'm talking about this internally generated funds. I would go with
that means you are going to follow Pecking order theory.
Yeah, mostly.
I shall think in this way. I'll ask you. You have to be able to develop coherent argument. Different theories say different things, so it is your choice to believe one. Or if you are against all of this, you can develop your own theory. የትኛው ነው እንደው applicable የሚመስለው ለምን ብዬ ብጠይቃችሁ, you have to know the assumptions of each theories and you have to know the applicability in our country. ምክንያቱም አንዳንዶቹ በእኛ ሀገር ማያስኬዱ ሊሆኑ ይችላሉ. You have to know the context. For example, the source of finance, the source of debt financing in our country is limited. The financial system is bank dominated. There is no secondary market that we can easily sell another instrument. So you have to consider that too. So if there is no debt source of finance, you will be compelled to issue shares. So you have to think these issues too. So there are factors that you have to consider. We'll talk about that. Under Pecking order, internally generated fund is first, or internal equity. Debt follows, and if debt is not enough, equity will follow. So this is the Pecking order. And another theory, window of opportunity. Managers try to time the market window of opportunity when issuing securities. They issue equity when the market is high and after being stock price run-ups. That means sometimes because of positive information, the market price will boom. This is common. For example, there was a trade war between US and China. Because of this, simply the information will affect the market price. And sometimes there will be positive information. If there is positive information, share price will decline. I mean, will increase. Positive information, increase in share price. Negative information, decrease in share price. And sometimes there is a good market, a bull market. We call this market bull market. Have you seen the bull in front of Zaman Bank? Bull. Korma. What it implies? በሬው ምንድን ነው የሚያመለክተው? ታውቁታላችሁ? ዘመን ባንክ ፊት ለፊት ያለው or if you are familiar with the US stock market, Wall Street, bull አለ። በሬ ኮርማ ነው የሚባለው? bull. I'm not sure about that. What it indicates, do you know that? We call bull market. Are you with me?
Yes.
Yes, Roof.
አጥፍተሉ ኮኔክሽን የተቋረጠ ይመስል
ስለማናውቀው
ቡል ኦኬ አክቹአሊ መሃል ላይ ተስላላይ ነው ሃይ ማርኬት ወይም ደግሞ ቡል ማርኬት እንለዋለን ሎው ሲሆን ደግሞ ቢር ድብ ምልክት in the financial market bull market indicates a good market that means investors are motivated there is enough amount of seller and enough amount of buyer so market participants are optimistic about the future የተነቃቃ ፋይናንሻል ማርኬት ማለት ነው ቡል ማርኬት in the financial world አንዳንዴ ምናልባት የሀገሪቱ አስተዳደር ፖለቲካል እንትኑ ሊሆን ይችላል ከሌላ ሀገሮች ጋር ያላት ግንኙነት ሊሆን ይችላል ጥሩ ሲሆን ማርኬቱ ቡል ይሆናል ይጨምራል ዋጋ እየጨመረ ይሄዳል ዲማንድ እና ሰፕላይ ይመጣጠናል we call that market a bull market the reverse is bear market የድብ bear market is the reverse pessimist investors and there's no enough amount of buyers and sellers and if the market is bull market or if there is high market managers will decide to issue shares because the share price is high and action ሸጦ ብዙ ብር ማግኘት ይችላሉ ማለት ነው that means so marketun time ያደርጋሉ and the issue date when the stock market is low or in other words bear market if the stock price is declining the managers will decide to issue debt instrument bond window of opportunity time una ያሉ የገበያውን ሁኔታ ያሉ managers high market that means market price increase share market price increase managers will issue shares low market because the share price is low they will issue debt instrument so they issue short-term debt when the term structure is upward sloping and long-term debt when it is relatively flat depending on the market and the market ዋጋው ቀንሶ ምን ያህል ይቆያል ዋጋው ጨምሮ ምን ያህል ይቆያል ሚለውን ታይም ይደረጋል you can read this paper so simply window of opportunity here says that managers time the market and decide the source of finance for them so you as a business manager there are things that you have to consider at the time of selecting debt financing or equity financing there are other factors that must be considered and those factors will influence your source of finance one is sales stability if your company's sales is stable that means if there is a stable increase in sales in your company the source of finance is usually debt financing because there is no possibility of financial distress that means you can easily pay the borrowed fund with interest and you can use the advantage of debt financing so companies with stable sales will prefer debt but this is not true asset structure firms with a physical asset and firms with intangible asset tangible and intangible and usually tangible assets or physical assets are suitable for collateral so if your company's assets are physical assets if most of the assets are physical probably debt financing rather than equity financing will be preferred so asset structure will influence our source of finance if there is no asset that will be suitable for collateral equity financing so asset structure will affect our source of finance tax obviously if corporate tax is high what will be the appropriate source of finance let me ask you if the country's corporate tax is high what do you think the appropriate source of finance must be is that issuing bond or issuing common stock common stock why
because there is after tax we pay the shareholders the dividend.
That means we are paying higher tax. Another one, we can answer this. If the corporate tax is high in our country, simply if the tax rate is high, what source of finance is appropriate?
I think
Debt
this
or
date.
Debt. What's the reason?
Yeah, because companies will pay from their profit a huge amount of tax, so they will prefer the debt rather than the issuing stock.
Debt rather
The
than
capital gain from issuing stock will be higher than the debt.
Okay. It is debt because if it is debt financing, there will be interest. Interest will be deducted from taxable income. So the amount of tax that will be paid can be minimized. So more cash will be available for shareholders. But if it is equity financing or if we issue shares, we will pay dividend after paying tax. So the dividend is not deductible from our taxable income. So debt has tax advantage, as I have seen under MM proposition 2 and 3. Is that clear? So higher tax, debt financing is preferable. Because we can minimize the tax expense by deducting interest from the taxable income.
Yeah.
Financial flexibility is another one. Availability of adequate borrowing capacity. Sometimes the capital structure may be regulated. The maximum level of debt may be regulated, usually. Maximum level of debt. For example, if it is 60% debt and 40% equity, maximum ብድር የሚቻለው 60 ነው። ከዛ ማነስ ይቻላል ግን ዴቱ ማክሲመም 60 ተብሎ ቢወሰን assume two companies lower company A company B and let's assume capital structure debt financing equity financing assume both companies are under the same industry the maximum level of debt is 60%. If company A is with, let's say, 58% of debt and 42% of equity, 100. Company B, 30% of debt and 70% of equity. What will be the source of if all companies need additional source of finance? What will be the additional source of finance for company A? Is that debt or equity? Assume both needs source. Okay. Sorry.
For A, there is equity.
For A, equity. For B,
Debt.
debt. For A, equity. For Y, what's the reason? What's the reason for choosing equity? This is because close to the maximum level of debt. So the borrowing capacity of company A is limited. So the company A will not afford to use, it is not advisable to use the maximum level of debt and better to have some flexibility. So the financial flexibility will affect the source of finance. Managerial conservatism or aggressiveness. For example, if the manager is risk taker, which source of finance will be preferred by that manager? Risk-taking manager. Is that debt or equity?
I think it's debt.
Debt. Why? Debt financing has its own advantage and it has risk. The risk is financial distress, the advantage is tax advantage. So risk-taking managers will take risk, high risk, and expect high return. So if the manager is risk averse, the reverse, equity. So the capital structure of the company will be influenced by the managerial conservatism and aggressiveness too. So these are concluding comments. If you have any question on capital structure, you can ask. you have any question? Okay, if you have no, let's see lease financing. This is another source of finance. Lease financing. Leasing, let's see the term first. Leasing refers to acquiring use of an asset by agreeing to make series of periodic tax deductible payments. So the agreement is like rent. We can use the asset and we can pay for the use of that asset periodically. And lease is a contractual agreement between the lessee or the user of the asset and lessor, the owner of the asset. So the owner of the asset will receive periodical payment from the user of the asset, or in other words, the lessee. Lessor. የአከራይና ተከራይ አይነት relationship ነው የሚኖራቸው. The asset owner and the asset user. So the agreement establishes that the lessee has right to use the asset. Lessee or the user, the right to use the asset and returns must make periodic payment to lessor. Right to use and obligation to pay by the lessee. Lessor, either the assets manufacturer or independent leasing company, will have the ownership right. Let's say it. For example, if your company is interested to buy the asset, you have two options. For example, if you need machine for your company, you can buy the machine or you can lease the machine. If you buy the machine, the firm buys the asset and use the asset. You can buy the machine from the manufacturer, maybe. You can buy the machine from the manufacturer, and you can use the asset and you can own the asset if you buy it. Your company can use the asset, can own the asset. The ownership right of that asset is for your company, and the source of finance for your company may be equity or from shareholders or creditors or debt finance. If your company buys the asset, you can buy from the manufacturer, you can use the asset, you can own the asset. The source of finance for your company will be from equity or debt. If you are leasing, or if your company is leasing the asset, you can lease the asset from a manufacturer or from the lessor. Usually there are lease companies or lessors. Leasing company or the lessor buys the asset from the manufacturer. The lessor owns the asset but doesn't use the asset. The asset will be used by the lessee. Assume your company is a leasing company or company interested to use some machinery or asset simply. So the lessee will use the asset but doesn't own the asset. So the ownership is to the lessor. The lessee only uses the asset but doesn't own the asset. So the source of finance for the lessor is similar with the previous one, from equity or creditors. Simply assume you have a company you are interested to use a certain asset, or you need an asset. You can buy it or you can lease it. If you buy it, you own it and you use it. The source of finance may be equity or debt. If you lease the company, no need to own the assets. Another company or lessor will buy the asset from the manufacturer, and you can use the asset and you'll have to pay periodically. But the source of finance for the lessor company may be from equity or shareholders or creditors of debt. This is the lease arrangement. And why do we need to consider lease, or reasons to consider lease? We have two options. We can buy the asset or we can lease the asset. Why leasing? The first reason is maybe lower interest rate. Lower interest rate. That means if we lease the asset, we can have cost saving. If you're interested to buy the asset, maybe the source of finance is from debt financing. We can borrow money from a bank and we can purchase the asset, and there is interest if we buy it. If we lease it, there will be periodical lease payment. The interest on borrowed fund compared with the periodical lease payment. Lease payment may be lower than interest payment. So in this case, it is better to lease the asset. And way to avoid risk of technological change. For example, if it is a machine, and if there is frequent technological change in the area, if we own the asset, the risk is for our company because we are owners. If we lease the asset and if there is technological change, there will be possibility of canceling the lease agreement and leasing another asset with the recent technology. So we can avoid risk of technological change by leasing the asset. Or it may be a way to avoid transaction costs associated with buying and selling. If we are buying the asset, maybe importing it from abroad, the transaction cost is high. So we can simply lease from the local lease company. So we can minimize transaction costs by leasing the asset. It may be a way to avoid restrictions or covenants of debt financing. Sometimes, usually, we can say, if it is debt financing, if there is bank loan, for example, there is agreement, covenant, restrictions will be there, including the operational activities of the company. Maybe restricted to enter into some area of business, maybe restricted to have additional source of finance from debt and the likes. To avoid restrictions because of debt financing, because of borrowing money and buying the asset, there will be restriction. To avoid that restriction, we can lease the asset. And in some types of leases, maintenance costs may be included. Actually, it depends on the type of lease. There are different types, we'll see. So these are some of the reasons to consider leasing instead of buying. Okay, there are some. There was Mohammed. There was lease financing by Development Bank of Ethiopia. I'm not sure about the current practice. London ተቋማት አሴቱን ይገዛና በሊዝ. And there is a lease company. I think the name, if I'm not mistaken, Etolis. There is also a lease company. And the Development Bank was also trying to finance companies in the form of lease financing. So there is a practice. Okay, let's see basic types of leases. And before that, if you have any question, you can ask. If you have any question. Oh, I can't hear you. Sorry, your voice is not clear. Who are you? Spakiros, are you talking?
Just being a debtor, maybe financial institutions, what is their interest on the asset which is leased or bought? Because it says to avoid restrictions, covenants of debt financing. Is there any problem if it could be bought from someone else, or how can we take as an advantage in this case than the buying one? It's not clear for me.
Okay, as we are assuming that to buy the asset, the source of finance may be debt financing.
Okay.
Allow me to speak in Amharic. ተበድረህ አሴቱን ብትገዛው ብድሩ አግሪመንት ላይ ይህን መስራት ትችላለህ ይህን አትችልም የሚል ሪስትሪክሽን ይኖረዋል። ተበድረህ አሴቱን ብትገዛው የራስህ ብታረገው። But if we lease the asset, አሴቱን ብድሩን ትተውና አሴቱን በሊዝ ብታመጣው ያን ሪስትሪክሽን አቮይድ ማድረግ ትችላለህ ነው አይዲያ። Am I clear?
ስለዚህ ባንኮች ወይም አበዳሪዎች ይህንን አይነት ፕሮሲጀር ይከተላሉ ነው እንዳሰራር ነው ማለት ወይስ እሱ ነው እንትን ያለ ማለት አቮይድ ያደርጋሉ ማለት ነው ይሄን ነገር
አንተ ራስን እንደ ሊዚ አስበው ድርጅት ማሽን ይፈልጋል ማሽኑን አንደኛው አማራጭ ከባንክ ከበድረህ ትገዛዋለህ የራስህ ታረጋዋለህ
ኦኬ
ሁለተኛው አማራጭ ደግሞ እነዚህ ሊዝ የሚሰጡ ተቋማት ላይ ትሄድና አሴቱን ታመጣና ትጠቀምበታለህ ፔሪዮዲካሊ እንደ ኪራይ ትከፍላለህ ነው Am I clear?
ያ
ስለዚህ በብድር ስትገዛ ስምምነት ይኖራል ተጨማሪ ብድር እንዳትበደል ሊሆን ይችላል ያንን ሳትከፍል ወይም የሆነ ቢዝነስ ኤሪያ ላይ እንዳትገባ ሊሆን ይችላል something covenants or restrictions ይኖሩታል ብድር በራሱ ስለዚህ ተበድረ ከምትገዛውና የራስህ ከምታረጋው አሴቱን በሊዝ ብታገኘው በሊዝ ሊዝ እና ዝም ብሎ ተራ የብድር እንትኑ ይለያያል ሊዝ ሲባል አሴቱ ነው የሚሰጠው ለድርጅት ለአንተ አሴቱን ትጠቀማለህ ፔሪዮዲካሊ ትከፍላለህ
clear
okay I have another question okay there's two types of leases two common types of leases basic types one is operating lease other is financing lease or we can call it capital lease and accountants also use the term capital lease to refer this financial lease financial or capital lease you can use these terms interchangeably operating and financial lease and let's see the characteristics of operating lease operating leases are usually not fully amortized that means there will be periodical lease payment by the leasee that lease payment will not cover the full cost of the asset. That's what we call it not fully amortized. For example, if the value of the asset is, let's say, $10,000, if the estimated economic life is, let's say, 10 years, if the lease agreement is to use the asset for, let's say, for 5 years, and let's assume that the periodical lease payment is 1,000. So in the lease period, the total amount of lease payment will be 1,000 times 5. It will be 5,000. So the leasee will only pay 5,000. So this 5,000 will not cover the cost of the asset, not fully amortized. So it's not fully amortized. Is one characteristic. So this means that the payment required under the term of the lease are not enough to cover the full cost of the asset, as I have said in this example. And this occurs because the term or life of the operating lease is usually less than the economic life of the asset. If the economic life of the asset is 10 years, the lease agreement is 5. Because of this, the lease will not be fully amortized. Thus, the lessor must expect to recover the cost of the asset by renewing the lease or by selling it. At the end of year 5, the lessor will receive the asset or will renew the agreement. By renewing the agreement, for example, if there is additional 5 years agreement, it will be fully amortized. If the agreement is not renewed, it is possible to sell the asset to cover the initial cost of the asset. So these are the two options available for the lessor: selling the asset or renewing the lease agreement. And usually requires the lessor to maintain and insure the asset. That means the leasee will have the use right only use the asset and make periodical payments. The asset will be owned by the lessor. So the lessor will maintain the asset and the lessor will insure the asset if it is operating lease. And there is also a cancellation option. It's possible to cancel the contractual agreement or the lease contract by the leasee. The leasee will have right to cancel the agreement. So these are characteristics of operating lease. Another type of lease is capital or financing lease. it is the opposite of operating lease. The opposite of operating lease. It will be fully amortized. That means the periodical lease payment will cover the cost of the asset. And do not provide maintenance or service by the lessor. Exact reverse of operating lease. And the lease usually has right to renew the asset on expiration. Right to renew. There is no cancellation option usually by the leasee, because the leasee will not have cancellation right. But there is right to renew the agreement, and generally financial lease cannot be cancelled. So two special types of leases are sales and leaseback arrangements and leverage lease. There are sub-classifications for leases. And actually, there are hybrid leases too, operating and financing. For example, there is no cancellation right for financial lease, but sometimes the agreement may include cancellation and full amortization at the same time. It will be fully amortized. That is the characteristics of financial lease. And there will be cancellation agreement. There will be cancellation agreement. This is not the characteristics of financial lease, rather, it is a characteristics of operating lease. Sometimes lease agreements will have hybrid characteristics. So this is not clear distinction. So practically, different agreements will be there. And there are sales and leaseback agreements, leverage lease arrangements. We'll discuss about this. Sales and leaseback and leverage lease, we'll see. And there are also other criteria to classify or to capitalize the lease, or to treat lease as capital lease. By the way, there is accounting issue here, accounting treatment. But here we are talking about lease as a source of finance. So it will be capitalized if the present value of the lease payment is at least 90% of the fair value of the asset at the start of the lease. Present value. I hope you are familiar with this. Present value of lease payment is at least 90% of the fair market value of the asset. For example, if the lease agreement is 10 years, 10 years. The 10 years lease agreement, let's continue the previous example. 10 years lease agreement, there will be interest rates that will be used, that can be used as a discount rate. And there will be periodical lease payment. For example, if it is 1,000, sorry, it's difficult to write here. 1,000 lease payment by the leasee. And if it is for 9 years, if the agreement is 9 years, you have to calculate the present value of 1,000 for 9 years. If that present value is greater than 90% of the market value of the asset, it will be treated as capital lease by accountants. Capital lease. The other is the lease transfers ownership of the property to the leasee by the end of the term of the lease. If the agreement includes this. At the end of the lease agreement, the ownership of the asset will be transferred to the leasee. If the lease agreement is like this, it will be treated as capital lease. Another criteria is the lease term is 95% or more of the estimated economic life of the asset. For example, if the estimated economic life of the asset is 10 years, if the lease agreement is for 9 years, so that means it is 90%. 90% of the estimated economic life of the asset. So if the estimated life is greater than 25%, or if the lease agreement is greater than 75% of the estimated economic life of the asset, it will be treated as capital lease. Sorry. And the leasee can buy the asset at a bargain price, at expiry. Sorry. So if at expiry, that means at the end of the lease agreement, if the leasee is having right to buy the asset at a price lower than the market price or at a bargain price, it will be treated as capital lease.
May I ask, doctor?
Okay, you can.
What about lease purchase?
Sorry?
What about lease purchase? What does that mean by lease purchase? Maybe I'm confusing with this one.
Which one? Lease purchase. No, practically no.
ከሱ አይዲያ ጋር ስለተገናኘብኝ ነው የኛ
sorry ሊዝ የተለያየ አይነት ሊዝ አለ leased purchase ለምሳሌ I'm speaking in Amharic is that okay
no problem go ahead
okay የዲቨሎፕመንት ባንክ በሊዝ ማሽን ለምሳሌ ለድርጅቶች ይገዛ ነበር የሆነ ጊዜ አሁን መኖሩን አለመኖሩን የቆመ ይመስለኛል ፕሮፎርማውን በጣም ያጋነኑ ምናምን ሲያስቸግሯቸው ነበር ምንድነው የሚደረገው አሴቱን ይገዛዋል ተቋሙ ማለት ነው ወይም ደግሞ ኢትዮሊዝ የሚባል ድርጅት ነበር አሁን እየሰራ ይሁን አይሁን አምኖሾ ሲምፕሊ ሊዝ ካምፓኒው አሴቱን ገዝቶ ይዘዋል ራሱ ማለት ከዛ በኋላ ድርጅት የሚፈልግ ከሆነ ያን አሴት ያመጣዋል ባንክ ከሆነ ሊዚንግ ካምፓኒው ከባንክ ከሆነ ያመጣ ያለው ባንኩ ይገዛዋል አሴቱን አንተ ተጠቀምበታለህ ፔሪዮዲካሊ ትከፍላለህ እንደ ኪራይ ካፒታል ሊዝ አይነት ከሆነ ከፍለ ስትጨርስ ስሙ ይዞራል ወደ አንተ ማለት ነው Am I clear?
ስለዚህ ካፒታል ሊዝ እና ሊዝ ፐርቼዝ ተመሳሳይ ናቸው ማለት ነው at the end of the year ይሄም አሁን ለምሳሌ በእኛ ካምፓኒ አሰራር አሁን አውሮፕላን በረራ ድርጅት ውስጥ ነው መሰራውና በአውሮፕላን ሊዝ ፐርቼዝ ማድረግ ይቻላል ከዛ አውሮፕላኑ ሲመጣ በሊዝ ፐርቼዝ ይመጣና at the end of last year ወይም 90%ን ከከፈልክ እንደውም 10%ን መክፈል አትገደድም ነው የሚሉት ከዛ አውሮፕላኑን የራስ የማድረግ አካሄድ እሱን ሊዝ ፐርቼዝ ይሉታል
ሊዝ እንለዋለን ማለት ነው
አንደርስታንድ አንድ ስለተመሳሰለብኝ ነው ታንክ ዩ
ራሱን ነው አንድ ነው ምንም መመሳሰል ነው ኦፕሬቲንግ ደግሞ አለ ልክ መጠቀም ብቻ as the name implies operating means using the asset only ownership will not be transferred to the lessee አሴቱን ብቻ ተጠቀማለህ
ትክክል እንደውም ሁለት አይነት አለ በዚህኛው እንደውም ሁለት አይነት አለ አሁንኛ የምንጠቀምበት ድራይ ሊዝ እና ዌት ሊዝ በሚል ደግሞ እንዲሁ ከፋፍለን አውሮፕላኖቹን እናመጣለን ለምሳሌ ድራይ ሊዝ ብለን ስንል አውሮፕላኑን ብቻ ይሰጠናል የኛን ፓይለቶች በመጠቀም ይሰራል እሱ ድራይ ነው ዌት ሊዝ ሲሆን ግን ክሮቹን ኢንሹራንሱን ሜንቴናንሱን እነሱ ይችላሉ እዚህ ደሞኛ ለዛ የሚሆነውን ክፍያው ይጨምራል በርግጥ ዌት ሊዝ ያው ሊዝ አድርገን በዚህ ፔሪዮዲካሊ ይከፈላል ማለት ነው በየወሩ እንደዚህ አይነት ነገርም አለው
that is ራሱን ያወራል so you have practical experience
yeah
if you have another question
መሬት በልጅ ቢባሉስ
so actually that is related to the political economic ideology እሱ ትንሽ አስቸጋሪ ነገር ነው እሱ ለስሜትድ ኢኮኖሚክ ላይፍም አይታወቅም ብሎ ለ90 አመት ምናምን ተብሎ ይሰጣል
ለአምሳ አመት ምናምን ተብሎ ውላል ያው አሁን የቤት
ውላል እሱ ለየት ይላል አስቸጋሪ ነው የመሬት ጉዳይ ከፖለቲካል ኢኮኖሚው የሚመነጭ እንደ ፖሊሲ ነው ከዛ መቼም ቢሆን አሁን ይሄ እንትኑ ካልተቀየረ ያንተ አይሆንም የድርጅት አይሆንም መሬት የመንግስት ነው ግን አሬንጅመንቱን ስታየው kind of አሴቱን ኦን ሳታደርገው ትጠቀምበታለህ ከዛ ፔሪዮዲካሊ ትከፍላለህ የሚለው ኮንሰፕት ያስተያይዘው ሊዝ ነው ግን ምን አይነት ሊዝ ነው it is a kind of operating በዚህ የሚቀጥል ከሆነ because you have no right to transfer the ownership እንትኑ ሲያልቅ አግሪመንቱ ሲያልቅ ኦነርሺፑን ወደ አንተ አታዞርም የመጠቀም ብቻ መብት ነው ያለ ዞሮ ዞሮ ቤቱን ስለምትሰራው ረጅም ዓመትም ስለሚቆይ ይቆያል
ስለዚህ ይሄኛው ልክ በወረዳ ደረጃ የጥቃቅና አነስተኛ የብሎኬት ማምረቻ ምናምን ገዝቶ ቢሰጣቸው ማለት ነው
ምኑን
አሁን ፋሚሊ ኦፕሬሽን የምንለው አሁን ለአንዳንድ ጊዜ ከተማ አስተዳደሩ ለጥቃቅን አነስተኛ ይሄ ምንድነው የሚሰሩት ብሎኬት ማምረት ምናምን የሚባል ማሽን ይሰጣቸዋል ዞሮ ዞሮ
አዎ
ስለዚህ በረጅም ጊዜ ክፍያ ምን የሚሉት ማለት ነው እንግዲህ እነሱ
እንደዛ አይነት አሬንጅመንት አለ
እሱ ነው ማለት ነው
ፋይናንሲንግ ሊዝ ካፒታሊዝም እንለው ማሽኑን በረጅም ጊዜ ክፍያ ማሽኑ መጀመሪያ ሌላ አካል ነው የሚገዛው እነሱ ኦን ያደርጉትም ይጠቀሙበታል ከፍለው ሲጨርሱ ወይም ደግሞ 90% አካባቢ ሲደርስ ሊሆን ይችላል ስሙ ይዞራል ወደ እነሱ ማለት it is a kind of capital lease አይነት የመጠቀም ብቻ ከሆነ ግን ወይ ስሙ ማይዞር ከሆነ
እንደ መሬት አይነት
ኦፕሬቲንግ ሊዝ ነው የሚባለው
እንደ መሬት አይነት ነው ወይስ
የመሬት ኢሹ is really complicated እንዳልኩ ባንድ ቢዝነስ እንትንም ያለ ስለሆነ ስላልሆነ ኮምፕሊኬትድ የሆኑ እንትኖች አሉበት በውስጡ ግን እንደዛ አይነት ነው መጠቀም ብቻ ነው መብት ያለህ ለተወሰነ
መጠቀም ነው ያው ምሸጥም ሲሆን ዞሮ ዞሮ ቤቱን እንጂ ያው ቤት ከተሰራ
መሬቱን አሸጠውም ያንተ አይደለም
ተብሎ ይታሰባል ያው ግን
ያው መጠቀም ብቻ ነው ነው ግን ደግሞ ኤስቲሜትድ ኢኮኖሚክ ላይፉም አይታወቅም የታደሰ ይቀጥላል አይደል ፖሊሲ እስከቀጠለ ድረስ
ይቀጥላል እሱ 50 አመት ከተባለ ይቀጥላል ነው ማለት
ግን መሬት የመንግስት ስለሆነ ነው በእኛ ሀገር
የህዝብና የመንግስት አንድ ላይ
ግን መሬት እንደማንኛውም አሴት ሊያዝ ይችላል ፖሊሲው ከተቀየረ ህንጻ እንደምትመዘግበው ላንድ ብለህ መመዝገብ ትችላለህ እሱ እስካልተቀየረ ድረስ ግን ኦፕሬቲንግ ሊዝ አይነት ነው የሚቀጥለው ማለት
Thank you.
Okay, let's continue. Another arrangement is sales and leaseback. Sales and leaseback is a particular type of financial lease occurs when the company sells an asset and already owns to other firm and immediately lease it from them to advantage. If there is shortage of cash, if your company owns an asset and if you face shortage of cash, you can sell that asset and immediately you can lease it back. So still you are using the asset and you are getting cash and the periodic payment of leases in the long run. So it is advantageous for companies sometimes if it is sales and lease back. So two sets of cash flows occur under this. The leasee receives cash today from the sales. For example, if you own an asset, a machine, for example, costing $10,000 machine, you can sell this asset for 10,000. On the date of purchase, you already paid 10,000. If you face cash shortage, you can sell this asset at 10,000 maybe or higher than 10,000 maybe. So you will receive cash today, and you can use that cash to do some business in your organization. And the leasee agrees to make periodic lease payments. So, for example, if your company receives $10,000 today, you can use that $10,000 in different areas in your organization, and the lease payment is periodical. You are not losing the assets use, but you are getting cash, full cost of the asset, and you are paying it in the future periodically. So it is advantageous for the organization. Sales and leaseback arrangement. Another special type of lease is leveraged lease. Leveraged lease. Three-sided arrangement. Look, let's denote the leisure company LR, leasing company LE. Sorry, and there is also finance provider. Let's call it bank or lease financer. Three-sided arrangements. So the lessor owns the asset and for a fee allows the leasee to use the asset. It's like another types of leases. The lessor will own the asset. The leasee will use the asset. And the lessor borrows partially finance. The lessor borrows to partially finance the asset. So there is a borrower company. the borrower company. So the lenders typically use, the lender companies here. The borrower is the lessor. So the lessor typically use non-recursive loan. That means if there is default from the lessee side, the lessor is not required to cover the money to the fund provider, or B in this case. Three-sided arrangement. The lessor owns the asset. The asset will be partially owned by the lessor company and another finance provider, owned by two parties. The asset is owned by the two parties. And the asset will be used by the lessee. If there is default, or if the lessee faces a difficulty to pay the periodical lease payment, this finance provider B will not ask the lessor to recover the default. So the risk will be shared by the lessor company and the finance provider. Non-recursive loan. Non-recursive loan. This is what we call it leveraged loss. It's leveraged lease, sorry. Leveraged lease. Significant portion of the asset is financed from another company, finance provider, for that specific asset. Okay. So this is what we call leveraged lease. Is that clear? Leveraged lease. አብዛኛው ከብድር ከቨር የተደረገ asset ማለት ነው. And the finance provider knows that the asset will be used by the lessee. If the lessee is at default or faces a difficulty to pay periodical lease payment, the finance provider will not ask the lessor to cover. This is what we call it leveraged lease.
But will the lessee be part of the agreement? How come the lender will not ask the lessor if the lessee could not pay? Is the lessee will be part of the agreement, or?
The lessee agrees with the lessor.
Yeah.
For example, let me give you an example and you can ask question. For example, the cost of the asset is 10,000. I'm using the same number, 10,000. The asset costs 10,000. It's very difficult to write, my friend. Okay, the lessor LR, for example, 4,000 is covered by the lessor, and the remaining 6,000 from other finance providers. And the asset will cost 10,000. The asset is already purchased. So the lessor and this finance provider will have their own agreement. So the asset simply costs 10,000. And the lessor will agree with the lessee. The lessee will use that asset, and the lessee will periodically pay to the lessor.
Yes.
The lessor will ask the lessee. The unique issue here is if the lessee faces a difficulty to repay the periodical lease payment, the lessor will ask the lessee, but the finance provider or B will not require the lessor to pay that default. This is the issue. You can ask now.
So will the finance provider bear the cost, the remaining portion?
The risk?
Will the finance provider bear the remaining, the unpaid one?
It will be shared by the finance provider and the lessor.
It says the lessor will not be obliged.
No.
The lessor is not obliged.
The essence here is, for example, assume an independent loan. If your company borrows from a bank,
yeah.
If your company defaults, the bank will ask your company. Am I right?
Sure.
But in this case, for example, this lessor company borrows money from a bank, let's assume, and purchase an asset that will be leased. Asset በጋራ ገዙና ለሊዚው ሰጡት. ስለዚህ ሊዚው ዲፎልት አደረገ ኖርማሊ እንዳበዳሪ ካየነው ፋይናንስ ፕሮቫይደሩ ለዘሩ መጠየቅ አለበት በዲፎልት እሱን ማድረግ አይችልም ነው ሊዚውን ግን በጋራ ለዘሩ በኩል ግዴታው እንዲወጣ እንጂ ልክ እንደ ተበዳሪ አይቶ ክፈል በጊዜው ማለት አይችልም ነው ለዘሩ Is that clear?
Okay, thank you.
Is leveraged lease. Do you have another question? Okay.
Hello.
Okay.
ማለት የሆነ ነገር ላይ ብቻ ትንሽ ተግራ ተጋብቻለሁ መሰለኝና
አይዞን ምን ላይ ነው
አሁን የምንለው ላይ
ኦኬ
ለምሳሌ እኔ ተበደርኩ ልበል ከባንክ
ብድርና ሊዝ ይለያያሉ don't get confused ሊዝ ማለት አሴቱ ነው የሚሰጠ
በቃ ባንኩ ወይ አሴት ሰጠኝ ለምሳሌ አሁን በቤቶችን ይሰጣል አይደል ለሰራተኞቹ በረጅም ጊዜ ከፍለው በሊዝ እንዲጨርሱ የሚያደርግበት በረጅም ጊዜ ይሄ ምንድነው ክፍያ የሚጨርሱበት ተበድረው አሴቱን እንደማሰጃ ሲዘው የሚበደሩት አይነት ነው ሊዝ ግን ዲቨሎፕመንት ባንክ ማሽኖቹን ለድርጅቶች ይገዙ ነበር ለይገዛ ነበር እሺ አሁን ማሽኑን እሺ ገዛ እንበልና
አንተ ድርጅት ይስተገስቶ
ለኔ ድርጅት ሰጠኝ እኔ ምናልባት አቅም ስላጣሁ ለሌላኛው አከራይቼ እንደመጠቀም ነው
አንተማ አሴቱን እየተጠቀምክበት ነው አምራች ከሆነ ለማምረት ሊዚ ከሆንክ ማለት ነው
ሶስተኛው ያልነው አካል ማን ነው ታዲያ ከዚህ ማለት
እኛው ሌላ አይነት ሊዝ ነው ሌላ አይነት ሊዝ አሬንጅመንት ነው ለምሳሌ ሊዝ ካምፓኒ ያለ እንበል ከባንክ ውጭ ሆነ ለምሳሌ ኤክስ የሚባል ማሽኖቹን በሊዝ ለድርጅቶች የሚሰጥ ኖርማል ቢዝነስ ነው እኛ ጋር ስላላደገ ነው እንጂ እንደውም አንድ የተጀመረ አለ ቀደም እንዳልኳችሁ ሊዝ ካምፓኒ
እሺ
ተረስተኛ
አዲስ ብድርና ቁጠባ አሁን ከባንክ ነው ያው ፋይናንስ የሚደረግለት
that is ሊዝ የተለያየ አይነት አሬንጅመንት አለው አንደኛው ቀጥታ ባንኩ አሴቱን ገዝቶ ይሰጣል አንተ ፔሪዮዲካሊ ተከፍላለህ ለባንኩ መጨረሻ ላይ ከፍለህ ጨርስ ወይም የሆነ ደረጃ ስደርስ አሴቱ ወደ አንተ ይዞራል ሌላው ደግሞ አሬንጅመንት እዚህ ጋር ያወራን ያለ ነው ሌላ ከባንክ ውጭ ሆነ ኤክስ የሚባል ሊዚንግ ካምፓኒ ሊኖር ይችላል
እሺ
ያ ሊዚንግ ካምፓኒ ከባንክ ጋር ሊሰራ ይችላል እሺም ባንክም በል
እሺ
ስለዚህ ሁለቱም ካምፓኒዎች በሊዝ የሚያስተላልፉት አሴት በጋራ ይገዛሉ ነው በጋራ ይገዙትና ሊዝ ለሚያደርገው ተቋም ለምሳሌ ያንተ ድርጅት ከሆነ ማሽኑ የፈለገው ማሽኑን ላንተ ይሰጣል አንተ ከማን ጋር ነው የምትስማማው ከኤክስ ጋር
ነው የምትስማማው
ኤክስ ጋር ትስማማለህ ኤክስ ግን
ከአዲስ አበባ ታክሲ እንዳለችው ማለት ነው አሁን አዲስ አበባ ታክሲ ድርጅቶች አሉ የሚያቀርቡ ግን ከባንክ ወስደው ነው እነሱ የሚያቀርቡት
ሜቢ ዲቴሉ አሬንጅመንቱን አላነበብኩም አላወቅኩምና ኢንፎርሜሽን ሼር
አይ አሁን ገብቶኛል አሪፍ
ኦኬ ስንታየው ያበኒ question or comment
አይ ጥያቄ የለኝም ግን ይሄኛው ሊቨሬጅ ሊዝ ላይ ሶስት ወገኖች መኖራቸው መረዳት መቻል አለብን ይሄኛው እኛ ሀገር ፕራክቲካሊ እየገባ አሁን ሰለሞን ባለው አይነት ሊገባ እየቻለ ያለበት ሁኔታ ሊኖር ይችላል ግን በአለም አቀፍ የአየር ትራንስፖርት አገልግሎት ውስጥ ከተለመዱ አሰራሮች አንዱ ነው ይሄ ምንድነው የሚሆነው ሶስቱ አካላት አበዳሪው አለ ገንዘብ አውጥቶ እቃውን የሚገዛው ይሄ ደግሞ እቃው የተገዛለት አለ ይሄ እቃው የተገዛለት ግን አከራይ ሆኖ ለሌላ ሰው እንዲያከራይ ተብሎ በሶስት ወገኖች ስምምነት ነው ሶስቱ አካላት ይፈራረማሉ አንተ እቃውን ትገዛልኛለህ እኔ ይሄን የተገዛውን እቃ ለከሌ አከራየዋለሁ ለከሌ አከራየዋለሁ በሚል ይስማማሉ ስለዚህ ስምምን ተከራዩ ቀጥታ የኪራይ ክፍያውን የሚከፍለው ለአበዳሪው ቀጥታ ነው በዚህ አይነት ስምምነት ይስማማሉ። ተከራዩ ክፍያ ቢያቋርጥ ውጤቱ ምን ይሆናል ለሚለው አበዳሪው በዚህ በብድር በተገዛው ዕቃ ላይ የመያዣ መብት ስላለው ያንን ዕቃ የመሸጥ መብት ይኖረዋል። ልዩነት ቢኖር ግን ኪሳራውን ይችላል እንጂ አከራይ ሆኖ የመጣውን መሀል ያለው ሚዲየት ላይ ያለውን ሰው የጎደለው ሙላሊ ሊለው አይችልም የሚል እንዲህ አይነት አሰራሮች የተለመዱ አሉ። ይሄንን ነው እኔ የምረዳው። አመሰግናለሁ።
ጉድ ግን ጥሩ ነው። ጥሩ ፕራክቲካል ኤክስፒሪየንስ ነው። ቴንክ ዩ። ግን እዚህ ጋር የምናወራቸው ነገሮች ቅድም እንዳልኩት ሃይብሪድ ካራክተሪስቲክስም ሊኖራቸው ይችላል። አሁን የሰማነው ሊዚው እና ባንኩ ቀጥታ ሊዚንግ ካምፓኒ መጠየቅ ይችላል ነው። እንደዚህም ሊሆን ይችላል። አዎ እንደዛም ሊሆን ይችላል። ነገር ግን በጋራ ዋጣውም ሊገዙት ይችላል። አብዛኛውን ባንኩ ይችላልና የተወሰነውን ኤክስ የሚባለው ካምፓኒ ያዋጣል። ኤክስ ከሊዚው ጋር ወይም ለዘሩ ከሊዚው ጋርም ሊሆን ይችላል እንትኑ ተጠያቂነት እና እዚህ ጋር የምናወራቸው ነገር ፕራክቲካሊም ቀጥታ እንዳሉ ላይ ተገበሩ ይችላል። ፊቸሩ ሊቀያየር ይችላል። ግን three parties በጋራ የሚሰሩበት አይነት ሊዝ ብለን ያዘው። Thank you for that. Thank you for giving us practical example. Usually ትልቅ ካፒታል የሚጠይቁ አሴቶች ላይ ኮመን ነው ሊዝ ልክ አውሮፕላን እንደተባለው ማለት። If you have another question. ሌላ ጥያቄ ካለ? ለካ ሰዓቱ ሄዷል። Okay, it was interesting class. I think time is too late. እስከ 1 ሰዓት ነው መሰል ፕሮግራማችን እንዳላዛባባችሁ። I think we'll say cash flow of leasing and we'll see how to select or how to decide whether to lease asset or to buy the asset by borrowing money from other finance providers by using an example in our next class. If you have any question, you can ask. ጥያቄ ካለ
እኔ አንድ ጥያቄ ነበርኝ ዶክተር ይቅርታ።
ኦኬ
ወደ ኋላ መልስልኝና አንድ ስላይድ ኤክስ እና ባንኩ ተስማሙ። ኤክስ እና ባንኩ ተስማሙ። ከዛ ለዚህ ካምፓኒ አዚህ ካምፓኒ የሆነ ስምምነት አደረጉ። ኦኬ
ኤክስ እና ባንክ
አሁን
ግልጽ አድርጌ ልጻፍልህ እዚህ ጋር ግልጽ ላድርገው። ኤክስ ባንክ
ይታየኛል
ይታያል በጎል ልጻፍልህ። ኤክስ ማለት ነው። ባንኩ አለ ሊዚው አለ ዚህ ካምፓኒ የሆነ ነገር አለ ማለት ነው። የሆነ ካምፓኒ አለ የት ጋር ኤክስ ቢ እና ኤልን በለው። ኤክስን ለዘሩ ቢ ባንኩን በለው ኤል ደግሞ ሊዚው ወይም አሴቱ የሚጠቀሙ ሶስት ካምፓኒ
አሴቱን የሚጠቀሙ። አሁን ይሁ ከቀጥታ ከኤክስ ጋር ነው ስምምነት የሚፈጥረው እንጂ ከባንኩ ጋር አይደለም።
ግን ፕራክቲካሊ እንደዛም አይነት አሬንጅመንት አለ ያለን ነው ስንታየው ሊሆን ይችላል።
የስንታየው ትንሽ ከዚህ ጋር አንተ ያብራራ ካለው ጋር ብዙ አልሄድልህ ስላለኝ ነው የጠየቅኩ። ሌላው ነገር ምንድነው አሁን እዚህ መጨረሻው ምዕራፍ ላይ ማንች ሊዘሩ ራሱ ኤክስ not obligated to the lender ይላል። ተስማ ብር ተበድረው ለሶስተኛ ወገን ሰጥተዋል። ያ ሶስተኛ ወገን እየተጠቀመበት ነው። እንደገና ደግሞ ያኛው ለአበደረው ብር ኦብሊጌሽን ውስጥ የለበትም የሚል አረፍተ ነገር ያየው መሰለኝና ልክ ነው ወይ ይሄ ነገር አልገባኝም። ይሄ ሶስተኛ ሰው በነፃ ነው ወይ እየተጠቀመ ያለው ማለት ነው ባጭሩ?
ሊዚው ሶስተኛው ሰው ማለት ለዘሩ ኤክስ ማለት ነው ይኖራል። አለው እንጂ
ምን አይነት አለው? አሁን
ኤል ሊዚው ወይም ኤል ያልነው እዚህ ጋር በየጊዜው የሚከፍለው አለ ሊዝ ፔመንት አለ
እኮ። እሱም ቢያቋርጥ ነው እኮ አይደል? አሁን ቢያቋርጥ
አሴቱ አለ in the first place ኤል የሚጠቀምበት አሴቱ አለ። አሴቱ ኦሬዲ ስሙም ስለማይል አሴቱ ተሽጦ ከበር ሊደረግ ይችላል ነው። ቅድም ስንታየው ያለን ሙሉ ለሙሉ ቢ ካምፓኒ አሴቱን ሊገዛው ይችላል ሙሉ ለሙሉ 100% ብሩን አውጥቶ ማለት ነው ከዛ ግን ይሄ ሊዝ እንትኑን ፕሮሰስ የሚያደርገው ኤክስ ሊሆን ይችላል ወይም ደግሞ ያልኩት ቅድም ሊያዋጡ ይችላሉ ኤክስ የተወሰነ ቢ አብዛኛው ከበር ያደርጋል ስለዚህ ፔሪዮዲካል ሊዝ ፔመንቱን ሼር ያደርጉታል ማለት ነው ለሁለት
ኦኬ
ስለዚህ ምንም በነፃ እንትን ሚል ሳይሰራ የሚበላ የለም እዚህ ጋር ማለት ዲፎልት ላይ አይጠየቅም ያልነው ለምሳሌ ኤል ዲፎልት ቢያደርግ ተስማምተው ነው ሁለቱ እየሰሩ ያሉት ኤክስ እና ቢ ስለዚህ ቢ ኤክስን አይጠይቀውም ነው
ኦኬ
አሴት ተጠቃሚው ኤል ነው አሴቱን የያዘውን አካል የሚጠይቁበት ይጠይቃሉ እንጂ ቢ ኤክስን አይጠይቅም አሁን የተወሰነ ግልጽ ነው
አዎ አሁን ግልጽ ነው
ኦኬ ቴንክ ዩ
በትምህርት ከፍ ብሎ መብረር ይቻላል ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ከከፍተኛ ትምህርት አግባብነትና ጥራት ኤጀንሲ ሙሉ ዕውቅናን ባገኘንባቸው በማስተርስ ዲግሪ MBA በስትራቴጂክ ማኔጅመንት MBA በባንኪንግ እና ፋይናንስ MBA በቢዝነስ ሊደርሺፕ MBA በሪስክና ኢንሹራንስ MSc በኢንተርናሽናል ትሬድ እና ኢኮኖሚክስ ዘርፎች በእውቀት ለመቅረጽ የበቁ ፕሮፌሰሮቻችን አረንጓዴ መብራታቸውን አብርተዋል በነገራችን ላይ በኬንያ ሀገር ከሚገኙ ስመጥር ዩኒቨርሲቲዎች በሚመጡ ፕሮፌሰሮች የትኩረት መስክ ትምህርቶቹ መሰጠታቸው ልዩ ያደርገናል በምርጥ የትምህርት ስርዓት የተገነባው ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ በመጀመሪያ ዲግሪ በአቪዬሽን ማኔጅመንት በሆቴል ማኔጅመንት በአካውንቲንግ እና ፋይናንስ በማርኬቲንግ ማኔጅመንት አስተማማኝ ትምህርት ይገቢውና ራስዎንና ሀገሮን ይለውጡ አድራሻ 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል